With a mother like Romano Lau and a grandfather like Maximilian, how dangerous can he be? He controls like half a nation, and their martial tradition is pretty much like, I'm going to say bad things now. Please don't shoot me. I'm running out of worlds to lose. I don't worry about Sun-Tzu Lau. Namesake aside, really, what can he do? With the threat now over, at least for the time being, the Inosphere launched numerous crash programs to revitalize and rebuild nearly every aspect of their nations, determined to make the most of the 15-year ceasefire before it expired. Military reconstruction was the top priority, with much of the new equipment sourced from the Free Worlds League. Like the Confederation, the League had escaped the Klein invasion completely unscathed, leaving its economy and industry intact. As a primary exporter of goods, the League's sudden influx of wealth transformed it into one of the richest and most powerful realms in the Inosphere. Sun-Tzu Lau did not let the opportunity pass. He secured an alliance by offering his hand to Isis Merrick, daughter of Captain General Thomas Merrick, who accepted. The two nations now found themselves in a situation similar to that of the Federal Commonwealth before its unification. The betrothal forged an alliance that allowed both powers to redeploy their militaries elsewhere. Sun-Tzu repositioned his forces toward the FedCom and periphery borders, but that was only the beginning. After the Battle of Tukaid, Comstar attempted to assert dominance over humanity through Operation Scorpion. The details of this operation will be discussed in a different time, but in short, it was a catastrophic failure that shattered public trust and led to the splintering of the Word of Blade faction. In the aftermath, Comstar was forced to renegotiate its contracts with the successor states, permitting Comguard forces to remain stationed on their worlds to protect HPG networks. Most of these new agreements also granted the host nations the right to conscript Comguard units in the event of invasion. The Capellan Confederation's version included an additional clause giving the Strategios, the Confederation's high command, the authority to refuse Comguard deployments within Capellan territory. Using this leverage, the Capellan military banned nearly all Comguard postings except along the Federated Commonwealth border, effectively transforming the Comguard into a defensive buffer. This decision freed up more Capellan regiments for rest, refit, and further modernization. Sun-Tzu, however, only signed a short-term agreement with Comstar. When it came out for renewal in 3056, he instead aligned with the newly formed Word of Blake. The Blakists not only assumed Comstar's previous responsibilities, but also offered technological aid across several joint projects, including the Lau Merrick-developed Impovado-class destroyers. Their commitments extended to humanitarian projects, such as constructing public works on underdeveloped worlds. Rumors spread that Sun-Tzu deliberately instigated unrest on certain planets to compel the Word of Blake to intervene and rebuild infrastructure, thus serving his own ends. The Chancellor skillfully played both Comstar and Word of Blake against one another, fostering a quiet competition to secure larger Confederation contracts. When one faction built a hospital, the other built a school. This rivalry accelerated development across Capellan space, the benefits of which the Confederation eagerly reaped. The alliance of Merrick also delivered substantial economic gains. Free Worlds League corporations were eager to penetrate the Capellan market, an outcome Sun-Tzu had anticipated and planned to exploit. Although the Capellan economy was not driven by capitalism, its advisors still understood that competition breeds excellence. By flooding the Confederation with Merrick goods, domestic producers were forced to improve or risk collapse. They quickly adapted, and with the aid of strategic media campaigns and selective trade tariffs, Capellan-made products, soon matching or surpassing their foreign counterparts, gradually dominated the local market. Other cooperative ventures included the previously mentioned joint Impovado class project, reciprocal military supply agreements, and troop exchange programs. For instance, the newly formed Harlock Raiders trained alongside the 3rd Syrian Lancers. The Capellan medical field also benefited greatly, as prominent Merrick researchers were welcomed into Capellan institutes to pursue areas of studies frowned upon in the Free Worlds League, particularly cybernetics. The Zhangjing de Guang, operating in Southern March in 3054, were disorganized, undisciplined criminals. Southern March militia units were used to dealing with them. They were ill-equipped fanatics who occasionally managed to blow up an isolated bridge or ambush a military convoy with poorly aimed rifles. The real guerrillas had mostly been killed in the 3030s and 3040s, before the malcontents exhausted themselves. The Zhangjing de Guang of 3054 were disaffected youths and vagrants angry at the system. And to the Maskarovka. In 3054, Maskarovka teams arrived in the Sana March and contacted Zhangjing de Guang cells on a dozen worlds. The most effective group was on Zurich, and this group received extensive training in paramilitary tactics and political destabilization. Maskarovka training advisors traveled with the groups, assisted in planning, and even undertook high-risk missions designed to destabilize the local Federated Commonwealth government. Weapons were provided, including, in extraordinary cases, gear for defeating Battletech security. The Sana March authorities recognized what was happening, but failed to capture any of the Maskarovka advisors. Complaints to the Capellan embassies were ignored. "Produce some proof," Capellan diplomats replied, knowing full well the Maskarovka operatives would retreat to the embassies well before any FedCom forces got close enough to identify them. In the months leading up to the Marek-Lau invasion of the Federated Commonwealth, Zhangjing de Guang attacks escalated to the point where they occurred at least once a week across the march. People were terrified, some of being killed, some of failing. Pro-Capellan fervor reached an all-time high. Media outlets on several worlds appeared to take this Zhangjing de Guang side, calling them freedom fighters rather than revolutionaries or terrorists. Soon, of course, the whole march went up, and Sun-Tzu got back most of the worlds our fathers took away from his grandfather. And the rest of them, well, they went to shit. Upon his ascension into the celestial throne in 3052, Chancellor Sun-Tzu vowed to deliver a great Capellan state. Within 2 years, he had already restored and significantly strengthened the Capellan Confederation. It was now time for him to begin the long-awaited unification of the Capellan people. Nearly 3 decades earlier, the Tikhonov and Sarna commonalities had been invaded and annexed by the Federated Commonwealth. Although Steiner-Davion forces controlled the territories, the hearts of the people remained steadfastly Capellan. Throughout the entire occupation, the Federated Commonwealth faced constant resistance from the inhabitants of these former Capellan worlds. Some of this resistance took the form of peaceful protests, while others were far more violent. Chief among them, the Zhangjing de Guang, a name given to several freedom fighter groups operating across the occupied planets. The Federated Commonwealth was never able to fully eradicate these movements without resorting to extreme measures they dare not take, fearing accusations of cultural genocide. Fortunately for them, the Zhangjing de Guang lacked cohesion. Disorganized and fragmented, they devolved into scattered bands of disaffected youths with little impact. That changed when the Maskarovka became involved. Under Sun Tzu's direction, the Maskarovka established covert contact with these resistance groups, providing training on paramilitary tactics, political destabilization, and the use of advanced weaponry. On occasion, Maskarovka operatives directly participated in their missions, lending expertise and resources to ensure success. None of these agents were ever captured by FedCom authorities, granting the Federation plausible deniability. Over time, the Zhangjing de Guang evolved into an organized and capable insurgency that, by 3057, carried out an almost unbroken series of operations throughout the Sarna March. Simultaneously, the Maskarovka launched a sophisticated propaganda campaign targeting the impoverished. Weighed down by the cumbersome bureaucracy of the Federated Commonwealth, many among the lower classes found hope in Capellan promises of universal healthcare, employment, and education. As a result, local populations often offered the Zhangjing de Guang shelter, supplies, and even active assistance. Internal MIIO documents recount the Maskarovska's Operation Doppelganger during the Third Secession War as the inspiration for Operation Gemini, though it's clear that the Gemini double operation was never as drastic as the Lau plan. Davion's double for Joshua Merrick was a carefully cultivated actor who knew full well what he was doing and why. The doppelganger Hans Davion had been a shell of a man, his original personality erased and replaced with the Maskarovska's version of Hans. Whatever else can be said about Hans Davion, he never missed the value of an enemy's ideas. Gemini was intended to secure the flow of war material from the Free Worlds League, but Hans Davion never really understood Thomas Merrick. It is unlikely that the Captain General would have stopped the flow of mechs, arms, and ammunition simply because his son succumbed to an often fatal disease. Honor would have prevented him from acting out of pique. That same honor, of course, necessitated a violent response when Victor Steiner Davion's cowardly activation of Gemini hid the son's death from his father. In July 3057, tragic news reached Thomas Merrick. His son and heir, Joshua Simon Merrick, had died of leukemia while under the care of the Federated Commonwealth. The death itself, though heartbreaking, was expected given the fatal nature of the disease. However, what followed was an act of breathtaking deceit. Victor Steiner Davion, now Archon Prince, had implemented a plan to replace the deceased Joshua with a body double. This duplicity was soon uncovered by Maskarovka agents, who swiftly alerted the Free Worlds League's intelligence agency, SAFE. Although Merrick was not inclined toward open warfare, such a profound betrayal by the Steiner Davion regime could not go unpunished. After months of troop redeployment, Merrick launched Operation GUERRERO, a military campaign against the Federated Commonwealth in retaliation for Victor's deception. On the very same day hostilities began, Sun-Tzu Lao declared the Capellan Confederation's entry into the war on Merrick's side. After years of rebuilding and preparation, the Capellans were finally ready to begin the liberation of their lost worlds. One of the first targets was the Lao dynasty's ancestral homeworld, Lao itself. The sight of all 8 warrior houses descending upon the planet was enough to compel the local garrison to surrender without a single shot fired. Following the Confederation's formal entry to the conflict, numerous Zhangjing the Guang cells rose in rebellion, launching coordinated assaults against Federated Commonwealth forces. Some, like the Zurich cell, successfully overthrew their local governments and proclaimed allegiance to House Lao. In other cases, such as on Northwind, Sun-Tzu dispatched a death commando descended from a loyal Northwind Highlander, Laurent Joffre, to aid the planet's independence movement. After a brief civil war between pro-independence and pro-Fatcom factions, Northwind declared independence, depriving the AFFC of its famed Highlander regiments. In truth, the entire campaign might have failed had the Federated Commonwealth been able to respond as a unified whole, but it did not. Catherine Steiner Davion, the eldest of the Steiner Davion siblings, declared the Lyran half of the Commonwealth to be in a state of emergency following the Merrick invasion, and proclaimed herself Archon of the newly formed Lyran Alliance. She ordered all traditional Lyran units to withdraw to establish Lyran borders and seize control of any remaining Fatcom forces and jump ships within her territory. While technically still part of a single alliance, her actions effectively and unofficially dissolved the Federated Commonwealth. With renewed clan incursions along the Covert Front and the sudden loss of transport capacity, Victor Steiner Davion found himself nearly powerless to halt the Capellan advance. To make matters worse, many worlds within the Sarna March began declaring independence, some forming small splinter states, such as the Sarna Supremacy. The entire Sarna March descended into turmoil, earning the moniker Chaos March. By the time Thomas Merrick called an end to the operation, both the Free Worlds League and the Capellan Confederation had reclaimed most of the territories lost during the Fourth Secession War. Sun-Tzu urged the Captain General to continue the campaign, arguing that the weakened state of the Federated Commonwealth presented an opportunity for further conquests. But Thomas had had enough. The Free Worlds League instead agreed to continue supplying and funding the Capellans, who pressed on with their offensive for a short time before finally halting. By the end of 4 months, the Capellan Confederation had successfully reclaimed most of the Sarna commonality. While the gains were modest, the campaign far exceeded the Strategios' expectations. The consequences, however, were immense. The shattering of the Federate Commonwealth, the rise of the Chaos March, and the resurgence of Capellan power. Sun-Tzu Lao's enemies were weakened, and his vision of a greater Capellan state had moved one step closer to reality.